Hello and welcome everybody to Conscious Consumer Network. Good to be with you for another episode of Dragonology Season 3. We have a real treat in store for you with this particular episode because this is episode 6 and deals specifically with the secrets of the Kalahari Desert. Now, many of you may be wondering how this ties into the theme of Dragonology, but for those of you who've been following this particular season of Dragonology, you'll be perfectly aware of what has been going on and some of the material and interesting areas we've covered. Tonight we'll be dealing with the lost civilization of the Kalahari Desert, going back to, of course, Sodilo Hills and Rhino Cave, which we've dealt with previously, and the 70,000-year-old ritual worship site, which had the effigy of a serpent in it. And of course, we explore the potential of a serpent or dragon worship culture that existed in this part of the world and show evidence of large-scale agriculture that has been discovered. And of course, this whole system was completely wiped out, and there's lots of evidence of a great flood and cataclysm which completely destroyed this ancient culture, which of course has also been found. And some interesting things that turn up with this particular discovery of the civilization is large geoglyphs, and what all of this points to, what this a massive amount of discovery points to, is the existence of a very large population now lost, once probably very advanced, once probably a dragon worshipping culture that engaged in ritual. The evidence is there. All right, so let's just go into a little bit of a recap so that you can understand the context in which we're laying this body of evidence. First off, the evidence of a lost civilization. We present evidence of a past culture or peoples who have engaged in trade, ritual, and perhaps even serpent worship. These people or culture may have been completely different to the native Khoisan or Bushmen that are commonly seen today in the Kalahari Desert, who actually do say that they only moved into the area at a much later time. That's not where they originated from. Now, when you look back in time and look back at some of the dragonologies that we've done, you come across examples of the wise men of Atlantis or priests of Atlantis who worshipped the golden serpent. Listen to Palmer Manly Hall's take on this and read some of his work, and it gets very into this idea of the priests of Atlantis worship the golden serpent. And supposedly when Atlantis was consumed by a tsunami or went under the ocean or whatever happened, some people survived, presumably the priestly class or the privileged class, on an ark or a boat or a spaceship or whatever, and then scattered to the four corners of the world and basically then restarted the culture post-deluge. Oannes was said to be one of the people who founded the Babylonian religion and culture, and Thoth was supposedly the person who founded, or the being that founded, the Egyptian religion and culture. And both are cited to have come from Atlantis, and both of them are said to have been described with either fish scales or fish head or half human, half not, either serpentine or fish-like with scales. And it's interesting because both these cultures brought serpent worship with them and the cultures that evolved out of them, including various skills and arts, which we shall go into. And of course, just to give you an idea of what these two particular entities look like, both Thoth and Oannes, depicted in therianthropic kind of guise. In other words, not quite human. You can see human hands and feet, okay, human hands and feet, but you've got a fish head on the top and, of course, a bird's head for, it's actually supposedly an ibis for both. But interesting to notice is the crescent horn or the lunar moon and the sun disk on top, which is always indicative of a god of some sort. Now, we've been through this before, but just to recount, Baros's account of Oannes was very specific in what Oannes did, and that particularly this particular being, Oannes, came to, because of the Chaldean people that obviously then became the gods of Assyrians and Babylonians, was said to have given the letters, arts, and sciences to humanity. He taught humanity to build towers and temples. to establish laws, and he instructed them in the principles of geometry. He taught them to sow and to gather fruits of the earth. In other words, gave them the arts and skills and knowledge of agriculture. In short, whatever could contribute to a polish or civilize their manners. All right, this is from the account of Berossus. And it's what we're going to be focusing on here tonight is very much the agrarian aspect of culture, which, as I said, hunter-gatherers don't really sow and have farms and settle and build communities and temples where they go to worship, and have rituals. That was that was the state of humanity, say, after the flood. The people had survived very, very kind of thrown back to the Stone Age, or the people had to start again. Very little technology left. Everything was, of course, wiped out, and pretty rural, pretty subsistence existence. But then you start to look at things like the Sumerian tablets, and this is a particularly famous one of the Sumerian tablets because, of course, many people reference this little icon over here, which supposedly depicts the 10th planet Nibiru. But what is also important about this, it is the Sumerian cylinder seal, which is rolled out in clay. It's a little round, negatively carved cylinder seal, very skillfully carved, which you roll along and it tells a little story. And this is a plow, and this is Enlil, the god Enlil, giving the plow to humanity. An indication, once again, of how the gods gave the arts and skills and gifts of agriculture, yielding fruit from the earth, that gave it to humanity. So you know that whenever you come across an ancient civilization where they were able to, say, have orchards or fields that were growing fruit and manipulated by them, that this gift, these arts have been bequeathed to them by dragon gods or deities. We spoke about this previously, but just to give a little bit of a recap on chthonic. The word chthonic means under or beneath the earth or subterranean. It's typically a reference to deities. You say a chthonic deity. What you're referencing is a deity that typically resides in hell or Hades. But the Greek word chthon is actually one of several for the word earth and can reference soil, agriculture, and all that kind of thing. And if you look at the chthonic deities here of Persephone and Hades, who are typically referenced as chthonic deities, you notice, again, carrying wheat, which is a symbol of harvest, again, a symbol of agriculture, of the agrarian cults. And of course, you're also carrying some kind of plant, what Hades with the plant has had. Persephone is commonly depicted carrying wheat sheaves and holding a serpent in the other hand. So you've got to understand the connection between fertility rituals and hell and Hades and the underworld, because earth worship rituals or fertility rituals are actually really chthonic rituals, worshipping deities of the underworld who supposedly are responsible for the fertility of earth. Really, they were the ones who gave us some knowledge of how to yield the earth so that we can reap the produce or the fruits. And thus, chthonic cults perform fertility rituals, which involve votive offerings or sacrifices. Some people believe that slaughtering 100 cows will make their corn grow beautiful the next year, and that's what they used to do. Or maybe slaughtering babies or human beings, offering them in ritual sacrifices meant that there would be prosperity and fertility, and it would bring good agricultural harvests and seasons. And in fact, these kind of rituals are still very much carried out in a much more sanitized version. Good examples of ones that get commonly practiced is, for example, Easter and Halloween, which are both seasonal harvest time fertility rituals. Obviously, Easter marking spring and Halloween marking the last festival of the harvest time rituals. Okay, now we're going to dive straight into the secrets of the Kalahari. Having given you a bit of a background, we covered off the previous aspects in earlier episodes of Dragonology for Season 3, but all of it leads into a certain point, which we have to kind of build up into. But we want to talk a little bit about the Kalahari, which is a desert in Southern Africa. And of course, I'm South African. This is an area that's of particular interest to me. And when you grow up in South Africa, the Kalahari Desert's kind of a place like you never think to go because there's nothing there. you learn in school about the Bushmen or the Khoisan or Hottentots and how they would store water and eggs and bury them under the earth because it's such a waterless place. But that's about as much as we really get. It's not like it's really that much of an intriguing place. I don't know what desert really is. But I'll read this over here. For more than a century in Western circles, rumors have abounded as to the existence of a massive city covered by the sands of the Kalahari. Okay? The Kalahari has a total extent of about 850,000 square kilometers. That's about 350,000 square miles. Most of it falling within Botswana, which is actually a country north of South Africa. The word Kalahari is said to come from a local word meaning a dry, waterless place. And of course, that is what a desert is. And you'll notice that the Kalahari is actually largely made up of this red earth, which is what Africa is famous for, is this red clay earth. Recently, I got the opportunity to interview Professor Sheila Coulson, who was in charge of an excavation that happened in the Kalahari Desert. And we've spoken a little bit about this, but I will just do the recap on it. And of course, Professor Sheila Coulson is the Associate Professor of Archaeology at the University of Oslo. And she was one of the team that got to excavate Rhino Cave at Sedilo Hills, which is located in the Kalahari Desert. And of course, Sheila Coulson and her team have dated this site to be at least 70,000 years old. It is a 70,000-year-old ritual worship site, and for those who haven't seen the Dragonology episode I did on this, you'll notice that this is a stone serpent which has been carved. There's the mouth, there's the eye, and there's literally hundreds of these carvings into the side, which when you actually have light in the form of candles or fire from beneath it, the carvings move and it actually makes the serpent look like it's alive. And as Sheila Coulson correctly pointed out, that 70,000 years ago, this cave, the layer you've got here, was at least a meter deeper than it is now. So the layer would have been a lot lower and the serpent would have kind of been above you as opposed to actually being able to stand side by side because it's just over a meter high. And of course, this is the carved serpent from the front. This is what it looks like at night. Not a very good picture, but they took some smokeless candles in there and were able to see the movement of these carvings, which are man-made carvings. Professor Coulson said that when they actually dug underneath the serpent, they found at the 70,000-year-old layer pieces that had been carved out of the serpent. So this was very much designed to look like a live serpent within a cave, and using light effects to make stone serpents look real is something you see on temples of Chichen Itza in Mexico, for example. This is a very old technique that has been passed down and commonly used, obviously, to give life to a unlifelike effigy, bringing the gods to life, almost resurrecting them in a way. So this is the oldest evidence found of ritual behavior and serpent worship. As you said, Sheila Coulson's conservative estimate was at least 70,000 years before present. And as you can see, this is nicely, we've got the lines which point out where all the contours in the mouth of this thing go. And it's very hard for anybody to argue that this is not clearly and distinctly the shape of a serpent. Now, these are some of the Middle to Stone Age points that were found when Sheila Coulson's team actually excavated the site. And you'll notice they are beautifully formed, lots of different colors. Some of these pieces are brought in from very far away, which means that there's been great effort gone to get these pieces to the site. Many of them were carved on the site, and then it seems just abandoned there because they're in perfect condition. Very exotic pieces of stone. To say some of them came from hundreds of kilometers away. And it's no real evidence as to what these were used by, but considering that these come from a layer that was 70,000 years old, in a sharp point like this, you would assume it's used for cutting. So perhaps some form of ritual, and then the stones were discarded there as part of the ritual sacrifice, as a votive offering. A lot of effort goes into making them, and then you discard it Also, it may not be the best thing to carry around a stone that you sacrifice someone with. You just leave it where, the sacrifice happens, as opposed to actually carrying this, tainted piece of stone around with you. I could understand one wanting to leave it there after they performed a sacrifice. But as Sheila Coulson said, there were absolutely no remains found. Bearing in mind, it is a 70,000-year-old site, it is in the middle of the desert, and human remains by that stage most likely would have been eaten by animals or disintegrated in that condition. But the fact that you have implements that have been carved and shaped like this is very good evidence that they may have used these implements for the purposes of ritual sacrifice within this cave. And of course, there's more exotic stone fragments which were found, which seem to be pieces that were carved and chipped off, I beg your pardon, some of these pieces. So it seems that a lot of the stone points were actually carved in the cave, brought from a far distance, prepared in the cave, and then discarded there after maybe a use or being deposited there as a votive offering, which is very interesting because the distinction of a votive offering is something that takes a lot of effort, was very expensive, and then is deposited in offering, never to be retrieved, because it's supposed to be in honor of the gods. So this is some pictures of Cedillo Hills so people can get an idea of kind of the landscape we're looking at here. And as Sheila Coulson said, it is flat all the way around for hundreds of kilometers all the way around, which makes it seem like a logical central meeting point within the Kalahari Desert, and it can be seen for kilometers around. Here's another aspect of Cedillo Hills. You can see it goes up quite high. And just to give you an idea of where it sits within the map, here's the marking for Cedillo Hills. What you've got here is the Okavango River, which pours into the Okavango Delta, which is actually a basin. That means that this river comes in here and it doesn't flow out towards the sea, rather it just dumps into this big swamp. And it's a truly amazingly beautiful place. But just to talk a bit about Cedillo Hills, the Cedillo Hills is a UNESCO World Heritage Site with over 4,500 examples of rock art. Cedillo Hills is located in the northwestern province of Botswana. Beg your pardon. It's located in northwestern Botswana, which is surrounded by Namibia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. Cedillo Hills are the only hills for hundreds of kilometers in any direction, which is located in the middle of the Kalahari Desert. Okay, so into the middle of the Kalahari Desert, you have this amazing oasis, which is the Okavango Delta. Cedillo Hills is right here next to the main tributary of the Okavango River. And of course, South Africa's here, Zimbabwe's over here, Namibia's over here, Angola's over here, you've got Zambia over here. So you can see completely surrounded is Botswana by these various African countries. Now, I just want to show you what Cedillo Hill looks like from above. Of course, you've seen the rocky fascias. This is now looking at it with Google Earth. And this is, again, for me, where it gets really exciting because, okay, so we've gone in and we've looked at what was found in the excavations. We've gotten in real close, microscopically close if you want, to the discoveries and excavations. Now let's look and see what is around this area from above. You know, it's often interesting when you get above something, you get a completely different perspective and you can see what's around. Okay, if there's any indication or evidence of anything that should trigger our attention. So this is a nice Google Earth map picture of it. And I'm going to just go to the next step down. Okay, obviously this is slightly further away. And you would have to be blind to not start to notice these various striations, these linear formations going across here, okay, repeatedly in what seems to be perfectly spaced straight lines all the way across. And this is the bottom part of Cedillo Hills. You'll notice that they're on this side as well. There they go. There's these lines that start to go out across here. You know, very interesting. And so they're on the other side of Cedillo Hills. So it looks like they could have been on this side too, but definitely it seems that you've got them over here. Now I'm going to pull slightly further out, of course, slightly further back from the image and see what we see. Here we go. Here's Cedillo Hills. Of course, this is the Okavango River pouring into the delta. And you've got more of these, just unbelievable how these lines are actually now above Cedillo Hills on either side of it, because here are the Cedillo Hills here, on either side of it, okay, and all the way underneath it. And it's really, this is quite interesting because you look at this and you go, well, surely that can't be a natural occurrence on such a large scale, such straight lines. Are those geoglyphs or something like the Nazca lines? What's going on here? Okay, I want to get a little bit closer. All right, just back for a second. We're going to go in here, all right, to this area here. In the next slide, which is over here, you can see. There's 3 areas I want to show you what they look like on the ground, so you get an idea of what this looks like on the ground. All right, so I'm going to go back, show you, here's Cedillo Hills. We're coming to this area over here. As we go in closer, there's 3 different places I want to show you the pictures of, so you have an understanding of what is actually happening at ground level. Okay, why it's so difficult unless you're up high to notice these striations in the earth. All right, so the first place we're going to is Tamacha, okay, Tamacha. And that's Tamacha from above and getting in slightly closer. That's what it looks like. It's nothing more than a couple of houses of rural Khoisan Bushmen, which seem to have closed-in fences or areas around them. You know, very little. A couple of dust tracks coming in and out. But that's as much as you've got. Nothing permanent, no gas stations or shopping malls or anything. It's really freaking rural, probably just dwellings of native Hottentot Bushmen, Khoisan. Okay, now here's Maleko Komos. I beg your pardon for that shocking pronunciation. But I'll show you where this is on the map, and that is over here. So Tamacha is over here. Maleko Komos is over here. Let's go back down to Maleko Komos. And this is what it looks like. It's got a lovely winding river or artery of the Okavango River, which kind of swirls in, and beautiful. I mean, that's a beautiful sight from the air, but it kind of gives you an idea of the swamp-like basin environment we're looking at. And I do want to draw attention to this little puddle over here that seems to be inside this big loop. Okay, because what you've got over here, if you notice coming from this little puddle, is you've got a pretty straight line under this vegetation, okay? And that straight line happens to be one of those lines we saw in the striations that have been grown over with vegetation, but it's showing up differently from the air. Let's find out what those lines are, okay? First off, Sepupa Swamp. Okay, let's go back to the map. I want to show you where Sepupa Swamp is. Okay, so you've got Tamacha, Maleko Komos, and then Sepupa's over here. Okay, so let's go to Sepupa Swamp. That's what it looks like. It's a swamp stop for tourists. Okay, right on the edge of riverbeds and got campsites and very rustic. I do really recommend if you want to go on a magical safari. The Okavango is absolutely amazing. I have been there as a child, but I don't think I nearly appreciated it as much as rediscovering it now with all of its magic and mystery. Now let's talk a little bit about the Kalahari and the Okavango, and you can see it over here. This is the Okavango River here, flowing over here and pouring into the Okavango Delta, and it's on sort of this more towards the west coast of Africa, middle to west, than it is towards middle to east. The Okavango River is in the Kalahari Desert, and it is the 4th largest river system found in southern Africa, discharging to an endorheic basin, okay? And that means that it doesn't flow into the sea, it just dumps into a swamp, okay? The Okavango does not have an outlet into the sea. Instead, it empties into the swamp in the Kalahari Desert, known as the Okavango Delta. And all that water, as you can imagine, coming in there brings amazing wildlife and, of course, causes amazing trees and greenery, fertile, lush area, and really is a great place to go on a safari. You can see almost any African animal there. And here's a NASA image with some of the labels on them of this Okavango Delta. And already you can see over here, look at those lines. Pretty hard to miss from the NASA image, okay? Of course, that's north over there. That's facing north. So this map is slightly tilted. But these lines are very clear, even from a NASA satellite image. You can see the riverbed coming down here, okay? Cedillo, I beg your pardon. Cedillo Hills would be somewhere around here. Yeah, no, I beg your pardon, there's Cedillo Hills over there. various tributaries. You've got the Toby River, I think that's the Wateti River, and yeah, you can go on a pretty nice cruise or safari through this area here. It's a massive, massive game reserve. This is actually an island in the middle of it all, and you can, it's part of the Morembe Game Reserve, which is this area over here. Like I say, they mark these as linear dunes. This is what NASA marks it as if it's a natural formation. Oh, these are linear dunes, must be formed by something that forms dunes. Certainly not human beings. Human beings don't make dunes like that. Oh, no, 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 of course not. But as we know, that's not true, because there's nothing that forms in nature in such concentric straight lines. But we'll get into this. Okay, so just have a look at the Okavango Delta, which actually during the seasonal flooding grows, because you've got the wet season, which brings in more water, and it changes the landscape, and of course takes up bits of land that get shown up when the water recedes. And here's a good idea of just how these seasonal flows go, and this of course would obviously be the areas that flood, the lighter grey, in the wet season. And of course, just over here would be Cedillo Hills, which is very close to the Okavango Panhandle. So it floods regularly, and that's interesting to notice, because it is, as you can see, an extremely flat landscape. There's no mountains, no hills, apart from Cedillo Hills. But you can see it's literally water just dumping into a massive swamp. You can see a green mold, as what happens with water that just stays stagnant. It just grows a whole bunch of green fir and moss, and bits of it form into islands, where trees can grow. And that's really kind of what you're looking at, is a big swamp that gets a lot of wildlife. And what you notice through here, these little lines through here, those are elephant tracks or hippo tracks through the water that you see over there. The elephants and hippos move through the water, and they leave these lines behind them. Okay? And here's another example of pictures for people on the ground who are going on a safari. As you said, lots of water. You can go with these lovely jeeps and elephants, or you can go on an equestrian safari and go through that water as well. So there's various ways you can explore the Okavango, but it is truly a magnificent area, and yeah, you have a great safari if you decide to go there. Here's some of the various Okavango Safari Lodge, which is just magnificently beautiful, made out all to harmonize with nature, lots of wood and stone, and just beautifully done out. And of course, there's a canoe safari as well, because the whole thing is a river. You can go all the way down the river. And just to give you an idea of what the Okavango is really like. Now I want to show those striations in the land we saw and what it looks like at ground level. This of course would be a dirt track, okay, where bikes or cars or whatever go through. And if you actually have a look, you'll notice there's like definite lines of darker grass and lighter grass. The lighter grass seems to come up somewhat in dunes. So there's a different texture of, say, soil growing the greener grass than there is perhaps growing this darker grass over here. And you've got it again here, another line over there, and another one in the distance, and there's another one in the distance. And so you can actually see them as you go back, over and over, repeating these different shades of green in the ground, which make perfectly straight lines. Very, very interesting. This is the landscape. They're thought to be linear dunes, but let's have a look at what this really is. Okay. This is an ancient agricultural canal system, okay, very ancient, and it's in the middle of the Kalahari Desert. It is a massive, massive space. The fact that it can be seen from a NASA satellite image shows you how big it is. In fact, it is the biggest man-made structure on Earth to have been discovered. That is how freaking huge this is, okay? The entire complex is 300 by 350 miles in area, which makes it about the size of the state of Arizona. Now, when you're looking at these actual, what we call agricultural belts, what we've got, let's explain this to you, how this actually works. You've got a piece of land here, which is about 1.5 kilometers wide, or about a mile in width. And then you've got canals, about 6 to 8 feet in width, which were dug out with waterways. And this is agricultural lands which have waterways feeding them. And it makes perfect sense because they would be feeding off the water coming out of the Okavango Delta. And that's why these agricultural terraces are on either side of the Okavango River, because that's where the water would be that would be feeding into these agricultural canals. So here we got absolute 100% undeniable proof of large-scale agriculture. Okay, absolutely amazing. And of course, as said here, the actual canals could have also been used for aquaculture, freshwater farming. You know, it could have been used for fishing or whatever. It's dual terrain. You've got agri and aquaculture, because the canals were about wide enough and deep enough to be sustainable for aquaculture, freshwater farming. This is the image slightly further back again, as you can see. Very clear, distinctive evidence that these lines go on for a very long period of time. And it says, yeah, at altitude of 7 miles or 350 feet above air, uniform width of canal spacing about 1 mile in distance is evident over a large area. Erosion patterns are clearly visible, with large areas showing silt or sand on top of the structure, indicating the potential inundation at some point in the past. So the fact that these canals have silt deposits in them, okay, is proof that there may have been inundation at some point in the past. Whether it came from the river, whether it came from the ocean, we'll go on to talk about that. But this was a thriving agricultural belt, massive, with canals running in between them. And here, slightly further back, you can see still, and you can see the erosion patterns, how over time, imagine if it's 70,000 years old at least, you know, that the canals have become less deep or filled up with silt or whatever the case may be. But they are very clear lines visible in the Kalahari Desert. And even further back, height of 42 miles, the erosion patterns are clearly evident, while the consistency and uniformity of width of canal spacing is now evident. You can see where some of these have been eroded, and you can actually see some of them still have little bits of water in them, which is rather interesting. So here we go, having a look at this particular image. As you say, it's the biggest man-made structure on Earth, and it's visible from a NASA satellite image, and you can see they go on either side of the canal. So whoever built this massive complex was obviously aware that there's a massive amount of water that gets dumped in here every year, and that what they did was they harnessed nature and built this massive agricultural terrain to channel the water from the Okavango Delta into their agricultural plains to grow their crops. Absolutely amazing. You can see it's either side of this river. This is the panhandle which goes into the delta. And you can kind of see some of the lines here as well. So you can imagine that this entire area must have been at one point covered in these agricultural terraces, because you've got the lines coming down here. That obviously directed all this water into the various canals rather than having it just spewing out randomly like this into a delta. So the entire complex covers an area equal in size to the state of Arizona in the USA. The whole system is about 350 miles, which is about 560 kilometers in width, and about 300 miles or 450 kilometers in depth, for the remains still visible, making it the largest man-made, if not well, it's not a natural structure to ever be found. This is definitely a man-made structure. Well, this is the area that it takes up. Okay, I would actually expand that to be over there on the other side of the Okavango River as well. So it's all the way around. That would be my estimate of it. I don't agree with where the square is placed. I'd say this is more clearly where it is. But what we're looking at is an agricultural landscape that represents roughly 67 million acres of agriculture, right? That's a lot. Feeding an average of 90 persons per acre on an annual basis. So you times that, and what you got is the terrain that has the capacity to sustain a population of 6 billion people, okay? That particular agricultural area can feed up to or more than 6 billion people. I actually did the maths. It's more than 6 billion people. Whether the actual population that existed there at the time was anywhere near as big, or whether there was just a lot of stuff that went to waste, food and whatever else, who knows? But realistically, you're looking at a culture or an agricultural system with a capacity to fill 6 billion people, feed 6 billion people, which kind of gives you some perspective that even if you just planted a single desert, you could possibly feed the whole world. You know, if you just brought in the various tools and whatever else you needed to dig those canals out, turn them into, you know, plant-friendly environments. From a desert, you could feed an entire planet, realistically. This becomes very interesting when you start to look at the maths and you begin to understand what's going on here. You know, there's so many big wows and so many levels here. Now, just taking a look at how we do it nowadays, because this kind of waterways with agricultural parts is very common, particularly here in Holland, and especially in countries that are incredibly flat. To be able to do a waterway like they've got in the Kalahari, you have to have a very flat landscape. It doesn't work on hills and peaks and valleys. So such a massive area would have to have been extremely, extremely flat. And this is what you have in Holland, is a very flat terrain. And of course, you've got a lot of this sort of thing. If you've ever been to Holland or flown over Holland, you've most likely seen how many canals there are and farmways with sort of agricultural strips in between these various canals. Here's another view, very common, it's the same in Holland. I live in Holland, so this is a very common sight to me. Even these canals don't seem to be nearly as straight as the ones we've looked at, but it's a good example of what we are doing nowadays, which is exactly like what was done back then. And we think we're advanced in the way we build our waterways and conduct ourselves in our civilized capacities. But clearly what we're seeing in these vast waterways in the Kalahari Desert is a very advanced agrarian culture. Okay, let's have a look at the bigger scale of things. All right, here is a map of Africa. Southern Africa has the Indian Ocean on the east coast and the Atlantic Ocean on the west coast. So this is the Atlantic Ocean over here. South Atlantic, North Atlantic. Okay, Atlantis was supposedly somewhere in the North Atlantic Ocean. Many people are starting to say perhaps it was off the coast of Spain or whatever, but that's why the Atlantic Ocean is called the Atlantic Ocean, is because of supposedly Atlantis, or Atlantis is called Atlantis because of the Atlantic Ocean. But this is most likely the site of the city of Atlantis, or the island or province or country of Atlantis, whatever it was back then, was most likely it went down here at some point, and it was most likely some kind of deluge caused by a tidal wave. I'm not going to get into the where Atlantis was or wasn't, because that's not where we're going today with this. That's a whole different lecture. But assuming that it was somewhere to do with the Atlantic Ocean, either on the coast of, you know, perhaps Spain or Africa, because here would be the Straits of Gibraltar, or whether it was actually an island. Again, I'm not getting into. What I am saying is that what we are looking at when we look at the Kalahari Desert is clear evidence of a deluge. And we're going to talk a bit more about that. And it looks very clear to me that the same deluge that may have, be it a massive tidal wave or whatever else, that may have destroyed Atlantis and many other places, taken them out of the water, this is what happened to the Kalahari Desert to make it the Kalahari Desert. And I'll go on to point out some evidence as to why. Okay. Now, if there was a population of 6 billion people, say, living in this part of Southern Africa at any given time, where are the remains? What happened to them? Okay, there's so much evidence that exists that points to a massive flood or tsunami having engulfed the southwestern coast and interior of Southern Africa. And it could be, you know, the great flood they talk about in biblical stories or in the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is in the Sumerian tablets. You know, there's a huge amount of evidence both in written accounts plus in geological accounts that we can see. Now, I want to just point out something just by looking at this map. I don't know if it occurs to anybody that half of this side of Africa actually looks very brown compared to sort of the third of the east coast of Africa, which doesn't look nearly as brown as that. And there is a reason for that, okay? Because this is, you would imagine it, because this is on the sort of the same equatorial or line of longitude, I beg your pardon, latitude, as this, you would expect perhaps that to be just as foresty and green as the East Coast, because this is where I grew up, and it is lush. It is very, very lush. Whereas what you've got along here is mostly desert, barren lands. You've got the skeleton coast up here, which we'll show you some pictures, but this is very clearly an area that has been at some point taken over by a tidal wave and devastated. And let's look at some of the pictures just to show what happens. Now, the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami, this is what it did to Lombok and Sumatra. This is what it looked like beforehand, and this is what it looked like afterwards. Again, it shows you that devastated areas come up very brown. Okay, they're no longer lush with trees and fertile valleys or whatever. Absolutely has a brown look to it. Go back here again. This has been completely washed with some kind of tidal wave inundated from the sea, and the evidence of this I will point out. And it's very evident in the Kalahari Desert. Okay, just again, have a look at that brown compared to what it used to look like. Okay, so here's what we're looking at on the east coast of Africa. You've got Namibia, which is just to the side of Botswana, Okavango Delta, Okavango Swamp, Sedilo Hills would be about over here. You've got the Skeleton Coast, and you've got a massive desert. And of course, this is the Kalahari Desert here as well. So what really you have is desert, desert, desert. This whole region is just pretty much desert. The word desolate and desert are very similar, and that's for a reason, because look at the Skeleton Coast of Namibia. It is just, there is nothing but sand. In fact, this is Swakopmund. This is the only sort of, the biggest town on the coast of Namibia. And look what you got behind it. Nothingness. It's just sand for as long as you can see. Very desolate place. Very little grows there. It, at some point, if it was a wealthy, fertile belt of something, it has at some point been completely annihilated by whatever came out of the ocean, whatever massive tsunami flattened this area. But it is very much, as you can see, not much there except sand. It is very desert-like. It's the reason they call it the Skeleton Coast. It's a very barren and harsh terrain. And then, of course, the Kalahari Desert looks a bit like this. Very red earth, redder in some parts than others. But, of course, as you get closer to places like the Delta, where there's more watering holes and stuff, you find more lush green and more animals. Tracking across this Kalahari Desert is a speciality of the Bushmen, the Khoikhoi, and they're very famous for burying ostrich eggs in the sand with water in them to suffice them and dig up as they come back and forth across the desert. Now, this is a salt pan which is accumulated in the middle of the Kalahari Desert. You have to kind of wonder is how does a salt pan get into the middle of a desert? Okay, well, it's very simple. The ocean is full of water. And once you would imagine a tsunami has washed over a part of land, some of the water may go back out to sea, but some of the water may get trapped. And then it may evaporate in the desert as things, as the hot sun pulls the water out the air, until it's just a little puddle, which when the last water goes out is where all the salt has accumulated, resulting in salt pans. And there are a couple of really big salt pans that exist in the Kalahari Desert. So this is not new. Anyone who has been through the Kalahari knows about the salt pans. And these are very much the evidence of an existence or of a previous tsunami. You can kind of see the landscape looks like it's just washed over, and then it's all receded into a salt pan as the waters dried up. And here's another salt pan called Doort's Flay Salt Pan. Doort means dead. Just to give an idea, here it is in between the dunes. You can see where the water of whatever ocean that receded accumulated between the dunes and then just dried up and left the salt behind. Not a very inviting place at all. And of course, here's more evidence of what you would see if there had been some kind of massive deluge. And that is giant current ripples. From the sky in the Kalahari, you can clearly see there are giant current ripples on the sand. In other words, massive amounts of water at some point washed over and compressed the sand that was there, making undulations in the sand. And it's very, very much the same thing here. You've got the Kure Basin in Russia. This is the black and white image showing you these giant current ripples from flooding. Okay, very specifically, these are created by flood waters. You can see here again, the scablands in Washington State had a similar sort of thing, a massive flood when the ice cap started to melt. It just came sort of rushing over a particular area, and you can see they create these giant current ripples. again from pressure and whatever else, digging up some of the sand and making them into ripples across the terrain. And you can see smaller versions of this on the beach. I mean, this is the actual pattern that the water makes. Of course, on a smaller scale when there's not as much water and as much pressure, but it's not very hard to see how these giant current ripples would form with massive amounts of water washing across them. And they are very evident in the Kalahari Desert if you compare them to other areas of the world with massive giant current ripples. Okay, that is what they look like. Now this is interesting because when you start, you say, okay, so all right, we've now found an agricultural area. What other phenomenal things are in the Kalahari Desert? And what you find are these guys. This for me is just mind-blowing. It's called the Kalahari Desert Spirals. And this is an aerial view of them. And it's hundreds of these spirals that are perfectly formed with what seems to be some kind of area which cordons them off or marks them in on either side. And these spirals actually were under a salt pan, and you can see some of the salt still here, and there's these white bits here. But this was at one point completely covered. You can see more here as we get closer, these various spirals that were in the ground. This is a road that runs directly between the spirals. And this is an interesting area here. I'd love to know what that is, some kind of maybe stadium or swimming pool of people of ancient cultures, a ritual worship area, because nature doesn't make formations like that. Okay. Neither does it make formations in perfect spirals quite like this. And this is from the air, all right? Now the glyphs were actually covered by salt only 10 years ago, so I'm not sure how all that salt has been removed, if it's been removed by hand or erosion or what the case may be, but this is the same area we're looking at. You can see here's that line that comes down here, here it is over here, and the spirals are actually under the salt, okay? Now the spirals begin to become exposed as the salt is starting to be cleared away. And then, of course, they're totally exposed, as you see over here. We can see them now with much less salt. So what the hell are these things? When you get down on the ground and you actually look, it's not dissimilar to the Nazca lines, where it's, you know, certain areas of just nothingness and then other areas of like stone forming these pathways or patterns, there's geoglyphs on the ground, massive geoglyphs. And it's not known what they are, what the purpose of them were. Are they artworks of ancient people, some kind of energetic vortexes, maybe perhaps some markings on the ground for spaceships or aircraft to come down? Who knows? But this is what you're looking at. It's this very dried out sort of floor with kind of rocks piled up in circles all around. And this is not a man-made, beg your pardon, this is not a natural phenomenon. This is absolutely an artificial structure been made by something that's not natural. So yeah, interesting that you find these in the Kalahari Desert. And of course, just to go back into how this ties into the greater context of dragonology, a spiral is very much linked to dragon symbolism. Spirals have been found in ancient art throughout the world. It seems to be a very ancient symbol and very significant. And I posture that the spiral has always been a representation of a serpent or dragon. The serpent obviously being a representation of the dragon. And the word spiral actually originates from the word spiera, meaning dragon, from where you get the SPI root, which of course makes up the words spy, spit, speak, and spell. Those words, of course, very significant when you're dealing with dragon etymology. And of course, the spiraling serpents is something that comes up again and again in various histories and various mythologies. You keep coming up with the idea of twisting or spiraling serpents. For example, in the Caduceus, or even in the depictions of the goddess Ningishzida, which is a Babylonian goddess. And again, here look, beings, winged beings on either side of serpents twisting around the central pole. These kind of base core symbols don't really evolve terribly much. They're just slightly differently stylized from culture to culture. Of course, there has been discoveries of ancient cities lost in the Kalahari. And I want to talk about a gentleman called William Hunt, who's actually went by the pseudonym of Gilami Farini. And he talks about how he discovered the lost city of the Kalahari in 1895. And I'll quote an article. It says, "For more than a century in Western circles, rumors have abounded as to the existence of a massive city covered by the sands of the Kalahari. The Kalahari is a total extent, as we've already said, of about 850,000 square kilometers, most of it falling within Botswana, and of course the word Kalahari meaning dry, waterless place. Farini's son sketched and photographed the remains of the city, and Farini published a book called Through the Kalahari Desert on his return to London. He also addressed the Royal Geographical Society in Berlin, and he also addressed the World Geographical Society and the Berlin Geographical Society. He even staged a Lost City exhibition. Farini described the city as one of colossal proportions, made from massive stones stacked on top of each other. The city was laid out in an arc and resembled the Great Wall of China after an earthquake, as he said. Here's some woodcuts of what he said to have found. There's apparently this sort of T block that's been cut into a square that rests on a very narrow neck, a rounded area, and other altar-like bits which were found. And this is a common depiction. When you Google Lost City of the Kalahari, this is one of the images that commonly come up. Ruins on the Kalahari Desert of a once existent culture. Here again, this bit of the T block, this round area, and this altar in the background. This is the images that you commonly find coming back, as I say, when you start Googling this material. Part of the city was exposed and part hidden under sand. Digging away some of the sand exposed a pavement 6 meters wide with the long stones laid at right angles to the path. Intersecting the pavement at right angles was another pavement, making a type of cross. There were no inscriptions or markings to be found anywhere, and Farini estimated the ruins to be thousands of years old. Since Farini, there have been about 30 expeditions to find the lost city of the Kalahari Desert, but none have been totally successful. Of the most interest, of course, is one mounted in 1964 by Professor A.J. Clements and his 77-year-old father, a journalist and photographer. And of course, this is Professor Clements' book that he wrote in 1967 called The Kalahari and Its Lost City. This is what it looks like. And again, you notice it's got this sort of block on the narrow neck on the picture. Here's some of the blocks and things that Clements and his father found, which was very interesting. Of course, megalithic blocks stacked on top of each other. And we find these in all ancient cultures, these massive, massive blocks of, like, wow, how did they move them that didn't have cranes? How the hell did they get them up there in the Kalahari Desert kind of thing? But what's interesting to notice as well is markings. Look at these straight lines, these markings on these stones. Those are definitely not natural. Those are man-made, or at least not made by nature. Clearly grooved in there. Right? You can see how these stones are stacked up on top of each other in the middle of the Kalahari Desert. Clearly the remains of a once amazingly big monolithic city. Here's some more stacked monoliths. As you can see, stones don't just get on top of each other like that. Flat stones don't just pile up on like this. They've actually been put there and most likely part of some ancient building or structure. Here are some more of them, and I apologize for the quality of the images. They are extremely old. And of course, here's a better image, modern-day rendering of some of the monoliths of the lost city of the Kalahari. As you can see, made out of this lovely red rock, which of course you can see has been stained over time. But you can see they're definitely stacked up on top of each other, not placed there naturally. This is definitely not a natural formation. The rocks form naturally. They certainly don't get stacked like that naturally. And here we go again. Here's some more pictures and a lovely little camel over here, sweet boy. But you can see again where once this was potentially the wall of something, a temple, a city, whatever it was, but clearly big monolithic stones that have been piled up. The remains of the ruins of the great city of the Kalahari. Now, to summarize, It's clear that there's an ancient civilization that could have been as big as 6 billion people who lived and worked in the Kalahari Desert as far back as 70,000 years ago. Think about that massive agricultural landscape, what it would have taken in terms of manpower to create that, something the size of the state of Arizona. Okay, so lots and lots of manpower to create something that big. What's interesting to notice is in the middle of this agricultural landscape here, you've got Cedillo Hills, in which exists the oldest evidence of ritual worship or dragon or serpent worship that has ever been found, dating back at least 70,000 years. So Cedillo Hills may be in the middle of a desert now, but at one stage it was probably in the middle of a very lush agricultural landscape, because those lines, those agricultural lines, go all the way around the hills on either sides. And ancient ruins are all over southern Africa. Of course, these have been made famous in books like Temples of the African Gods, co-written by Johann Heine, who was the helicopter pilot who actually found a lot of these ancient structures all over southern Africa. And it's just, if you actually do a count of them, you go onto Google and you start counting these sort of round ruins that you find in various parts of southern Africa. There are millions of them. So each of them could have been a home, for example. There are literally millions of these little ruins. Here's some of the walls. Of course, look at how this foliage is grown up all around it that you find as you walk through some of the areas of southern Africa. Here again, more of them. These remains of stone dwellings, stone temples, stone cities, all over southern Africa. And again, probably tens of thousands of years old. Of course, the Great Zimbabwe ruins, which to me is just one of the most remarkable examples of how advanced this culture who was living in this particular part of southern Africa must have been. This is all perfectly square-hewn little stone rocks piled together, and they've lasted thousands of years. Some of it has fallen, but look how high these walls are. These kind of conical shaped towers that they've made as square blocks, and they're perfectly rounded. I mean, this is a huge amount of know-how and technology that goes into building something like this, that even nowadays you don't find structures being made like this because it's too labor intensive. Yes, more of this particular Zimbabwe ruins, which again just shows you how advanced these cultures were. They're clearly not the native African cultures that we've grown up with in South Africa in my time. Look at the masonry skills, which for me clearly shows an advanced civilization. Love these square rocks, how perfectly they lay next to each other, hewn out of whatever they were cut out of, perfectly molded into shape and then stacked on top of each other to even got a little bit of a decoration. And they're quite close. I mean, this is only a few feet apart. Some of these double parallel walls that wind round with each other. This is clearly not stupid people who made this. Now, what I'm going to reference, showing you how brilliant this architecture is. Okay, this stone masonry is very, very good. Even by today's standards, that's phenomenal. Okay, this is what, when I grew up, what the native people, the Bantus, the Zulus, this is how they lived. They lived in these grass huts that they sometimes made with mud. They didn't go out and spend all day hewing stone out of the ground to build themselves these massive cities and structures. This is literally what it looked like. Grass reeds to form little closed off areas with little grass huts in. That's how it looks. Look here, mud and sticks, no stones. Okay, they build their houses out of mud and sticks. These are Himba. It's the Himba tribe. Okay, made of mud. Maybe they get some leather and skin and they throw it over the top, but it's not built with stone. It's been hewn and perfectly stacked. And it's a much more simple example of dwelling than we see exhibited in ancient parts of Africa, where you've got these stone masonry skills that are very advanced. Okay, you can clearly see the difference. So the Kalahari has many interesting secrets, and it surely is a place that I would love to spend more time exploring if I ever get the resources to do it, and document a lot more of what's going on there. Simply because there are so many fantastic clues to our past hidden in the Kalahari, and very much there's evidence of a massive flood which looks like it wiped out a massive population of at least maybe 6 billion people. And the evidence of the agriculture is there, evidence of their temples are there, they're places where they worship the serpent. And of course, we can see evidences of the leftover blocks forming their cities in the Kalahari Desert. So who knows how massive this culture was, but it seems to have been destroyed at some point with a massive wave coming over the west coast. And you can still see the evidence of the fact how decimated the west coast of Africa is, just how desert-like it is and how barren it is, because at one point was completely annihilated by a tsunami, possibly the tsunami that also annihilated, that came out of the Atlantic Ocean and annihilated Atlantis. But there's a few other interesting things that really must be seen if you are going to that part of the world. And one of them is the biggest meteorite to have been discovered, called the Hoba meteorite, which lies on the Hoba Farm West, not far from Grootfontein. And Grootfontein is one of the very few little cities or towns that are actually in the Kalahari Desert. It was estimated to be at about 60 tons, and it's never been moved from where it fell. And it's the largest known meteorite, a single piece, and the most massively naturally occurring piece of iron known on the Earth's surface. And you can kind of see how big that is. It's an old picture. This is what it looks like now that they've kind of put the steps around it. And pieces of it, actually this is a bit smaller because about 6 tons has been shipped off this thing and shipped off to other parts of the world. And this is another part of the Kalahari. It's also interesting is these amazing little things called fairy circles. No one can kind of work out what they are. And it's like thousands, if not millions of these little circles where nothing grows, and around it then you might have a very thick dense growth to form a circle and then sparsely scattered grass in between. But scientists are baffled as to how these are formed. There's been all sorts of theories that perhaps it's the sand is radioactive, or it's sand termites or something to that effect. But they truly are amazing. These little circles appear all over the show, showing that lovely red earth underneath, thick foliage around the edge and slightly less thick as you go further out. Then it's a total mystery, as I say. If you have a look at that, how bizarre the landscape looked, completely pockmarked with all these various fairy circles. And I love that they call them fairy circles, because the word fairy, as you know, is a dragon root word, rooted in the word phanes, which was the primordial Greek god of creation. And from phanes, you've got an amazing string of words which kind of evolve from these serpentine origins and roots, starting with Fane, obviously going into fan and fame, going into fairy and the boat fairy, fire, fear, pair, and then you've got Pierre, and then of course the para and kalu, kola, kulu root. And they all actually fold out from each other because it is ultimately one language which has evolved from an original serpentine language. And another interesting thing about the Kalahari Desert is something called, ironically enough, Dragon's Breath Cave, which contains the world's largest underground non-subglacial lake. This was discovered in 1986 and named for the humid air that is felt emanating from the entrance. Its unique condition, zero sunlight conditions, little wave action to kick up the sediment, and stable temperature allows for the existence of one of the world's rarest and most isolated species, which is the golden cave catfish, which is the Clarius cavernicola. And of course, the species is only found here. And this is how you kind of get down into this cave. It's not easy to get in. You've got to climb in from the top. But I find it very interesting that they've got the world's largest underground lake in the Kalahari Desert, because let me tell you, it's not the only thing that's underground. Situated underneath the Kalahari Desert is one of several deep underground military bases. One in particular called Camp 13. It's no accident it's called Camp 13. If you know your numerology, you'll know why that should flag up attention. But there have been many, many activities reported in the Kalahari over the years, including seeing UFOs and alien creatures and all sorts. And there's lots of really strange and bizarre rumors about what goes on in this particular deep underground military base, which is located under the Kalahari, with a massive access to a massive glacial lake with lots of fresh water. Who knows, maybe even a giant city buried under the sand. But it's interesting. So we'll leave it at that. And that's it, guys. For those who have missed any of the archives, please go to Conscious Consumer Network's archive website, ccn.media. All of our previous shows are archived on this website, so you can catch up with anything you've missed. And of course, if you've missed any of the previous Dragonologies, do go catch up with season 1 and 2. And of course, the first 5 episodes of season 3 are also up on the dragonology.info website. And if you go to the dragonology.info website and you want to download a copy of my book for €25, you get a €5 discount if you use the code Dragonology S3 for Dragonology Season 3, and you get the book for €20. So yes, again, that's dragonology.info. You can download a copy of my book called Spellbreaker. Everything else, of course, with regards to Conscious Consumer Network is listed in the broadcast guide, which is updated weekly and posted on the website. So do check it out to see what's happening and what is on. And please do support the Network Support Fund for 2017. This is a publicly funded network, and we're completely reliant on the public to keep this network on the air. Again, as I said, consciousconsumernetwork.tv, the website to go to find absolutely everything you need. And we do thank you very much for supporting free and independent media. My name is Denal V, and I'll be with you again. Goodbye.